I have a real passion for sex therapy, and it's very different in a lot of ways from other forms of therapy, and you guys will get a little glimpse of that with this presentation. And so I titled this, so this is talking to your kids about sex, and I did another presentation like close to this here a couple months back, and the people that asked me to do the presentation, I put sex in the title, and they said, what if we change it to like intimacy? And I was all, you can change it to whatever you want. Thinking in my mind, I'm going to say sex a lot during the presentation, so it doesn't matter to me what you change it to. It's an interesting thing in our culture, in the LDS culture, we say intimacy. And intimacy is really broad and general, and we don't really call sex what it really is, and it sends confusing and misleading messages to people. I had a couple in my office, 2 weeks ago, and they were talking about intimacy, and the husband stopped and he said, "I'm just really confused. What are we talking about here?" He's like, "I grew up in Washington. I grew up in Washington, and she grew up here in Utah." And so I said, I think I know what the problem here is. In Utah, we say intimacy, and we mean what? We mean sex. That's mostly what we mean. Everywhere else, when they say intimacy, it could be affection, it could be deep feelings for, romantic feelings for, it could be sex, it could be anything. So I wanted to talk about how we can change the talk that you have with your kids or your future kids, or some of you that are going to be therapists, how you can talk to parents about this topic. So I'm wondering if anyone has stories of the talk that they received, or maybe an interesting story they heard. It's not you, it's a friend or a sibling or something. Does anyone have any good stories? I've heard lots of them. But.
I'll share one. So as far as the talk that I had growing up, I've already graduated, but I had this first CD, and the name of what I had titled the CD was The Makeout Mix. And I came home from school, and my mom had put the CD on my bed, and she, with a permanent marker, wrote, "Better not be." And that was my talk. That is as far as we got into talking about sex.
I really like that story. That's a pretty good story. Does anyone else have a good story?
She wanted to be very clear about what we were talking about. So I think when I was about 12, she sat me and my little sister down and used a Barbie doll and a Ken doll to show us exactly what sex was. I'll never forget it.
I'll never forget it. Those are some good, those are decent stories. It's scarring probably and not that informative, but those are good stories to be able to pass down and say, hey, this is what happened to me. So I think the worst story I've ever heard was a woman was in my office, and she said, the talk that I got was, my mom told me, boys have this thing that gets hard, and when it gets hard, you run. And it was no wonder that she had panic attacks every time that her and her spouse tried to have sex. And so these talks, it's a big deal. It has a huge impact on you. Not that that's, your talks are going to lead to that, but that could happen. That's out there. And that's not a rare case. That's not the first person I talked to that had a message like that, where they were struggling with sexual intimacy. So what I'd like to do is, throughout this presentation, I'm going to talk about how this new talk, that's the title of it, the new talk, how the new talk can be a life preserver for individuals and for couples as they go throughout their life. And you can see how this was, the example that I gave, and maybe the examples that you guys gave, weren't life preservers that can help navigate away from troubled waters. And that doesn't necessarily mean to get into pornography or to have sex out of wedlock. That could be troubled waters of the couple struggling with sexual intimacy. Oftentimes, I think in our culture, we talk about the negative aspect and the negative side of sexuality before marriage, instead of talking about how it can be this help, this life preserver outside of marriage and inside of marriage to augment the relationship or to improve the relationship or to improve the individual's understanding of themselves or their divine potential. Does that make sense? Okay. So what's the purpose of the talk? What's the real purpose of that? Why do parents have that wonderful write on the CD talk or Barbie dolls having sex talk? Why do they do it?
I think it just starts coming up in their environment, and if you don't tell them, then they'll get information from wherever they can find it.
Yeah, and I think even more nowadays, they're going to get information from everywhere.
I think parents just like to check off the box, I talked to them about it. And so that way, the kids later go, well, I talked to you about it. So it's just over the story and we get to talk.
I really like that point because I think that just in my life experience, my parents did something in between what I'm going to talk about and that. Let's check it off the list. They were probably a lot better than most with this, but I think a lot of parents, they want to cross it off the list. I did what I needed to do. I'm a good parent. I said it's open. I put it out there. You know, I put the message out there. If you want to come back and ask me more questions, you can. It's on their plate. They wipe the sweat off their forehead, and they can move on. So what do they hope to get from it? Is just to ease their conscience, or what? You know, what's the point in doing it other than the fact that they're probably supposed to have that conversation? What do parents want to achieve ideally in having this conversation?
I feel like from a religious view, like we want to prepare kids so that they can make good choices and be educated about those choices.
Yeah, I think that's great.
She used the word prepare. I think a lot of families in the LDS context also want to protect, right? And that's kind of like, you need to know what's coming and how can I protect you from the negative aspect, the troubled water.
Yeah. I think that's the dominant message that you get is there's some dangerous things that can happen if we don't have this conversation. So we're going to have the conversation to protect you from those dangerous things. Is that true? And I'm not trying to lead you guys. I'm just curious. Do you guys think that statement is true?
That's what people believe
That having that conversation can help them be safe.
Well, yes, but it's just incomplete because no one ever talks about the positive things about it. And the one thing that I've struggled with is people keep saying, you don't talk about it, don't talk about it. Wait till you're married, When you get married and then no one talks about it because it's private. So you never get it before or after. So all you hear is negative stuff associated. You don't hear anything positive.
Yeah, and that being incomplete, that is exactly, I think, what's happening is you guys get, I get, kids get this half-truth. So you get half of it, but you don't get the other half of it. A client the other day said he was here at BYU, and he saw this guy that had a Porn Kills Love t-shirt. And he's like, that's so cool that nowadays we can wear a shirt that says porn on it, that we can send this message. And I thought, yeah, that is really cool. And we talked about it for a minute, and then I was like, but what would be really, really cool is if you could also wear a t-shirt that says, and healthy sexual intimacy is awesome, or something like that. You know, because you only get half of the story. You only get the half that, like, we need to have this conversation, and that sex, essentially, the message is essentially sex or sexuality can be really dangerous. And that is true, but there's also this other truth that's out there that it can be this really amazing thing and this helpful thing, this life preserver. So what do you guys think should be included in the talk that you have with your kids or that your parents should have had with you? What should be included?
I think for me, something I've thought about when we're like kids and stuff, it's a little intimidating. You're like, oh gosh, I'm gonna think about this. I think for me, I got the message of like, sex is for reproduction and that's it, and you better not enjoy it. And if you're enjoying it, you're sinning. And that's just like so opposite of what I believe, and that would be the part that like
I love that you are a woman and you were the one that said that, because I think that's especially what women hear. Men hear that it also feels good, but they get a little bit more complete message. But I think women especially get this message that it's this holy, sacred thing, true, that can help to bring spirit children into this world, true. But then there's no more statement of, and it feels really good, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a good thing for the relationship, and on and on. You women typically don't hear that, at least in our culture.
Also, there's a learning curve, and that when you get married, it's not 2 days later, you know what to do, and it's the same the rest of your marriage. That you start out having no idea, both of you, and over the course of 5, 10, 20 years, your sexual relationship changes. So when you get married, you don't think it just needs to be completely different.
And I have this awesome quote about just that I think you guys will like. This is like a long walk over here. Okay, so I don't even know if you guys can read that, but I'm going to. So religion versus culture. That's kind of, I was talking to Dr. Barnes before the presentation, and I said, I've given this presentation before, but I just felt like I needed to change it. And maybe that's because I like to give myself more work than I should. But I like to think that I felt impressed to change it, because I included a lot of religious quotes that were in here and statements that are on the church's website, so that you guys aren't just feeling like this is this guy that does sex therapy that's talking about it. You also hear this guy that does sex therapy and a lot of quotes from the church and directly from the church's website. So the ones that say have an R before them, that's religion. The C is culture, and it's kind of an idea that I put in there that address this from a different perspective, from the cultural perspective. So the Lord has placed on you as a parent the primary responsibility to teach your children. Though this is a great responsibility, it is also a divine privilege to have Heavenly Father's children entrusted to your care. One of the most important concepts that the Lord expects you to teach your children is the righteous meaning and use of intimate physical relations between a man and a woman. This guide was prepared to help you teach your children about these physical intimacies and to prepare them to follow the Lord's plan in expressing their own intimacy. Second one, there's no better place to teach and learn about marriage, love, and sex than in the home, as these can properly combine in a sanctified temple marriage. Harold B. Lee. So those statements, to me, I derive from that we need to be the ones having the conversations with our kids. That primary responsibility falls on us. It's a divine privilege, that second line down. It's a divine privilege to have Heavenly Father's children entrusted to us. I think a lot of us would say that we've heard that message. And down here, let's see, we're not just teaching about intercourse or reproduction or the biological side, but marriage, love, and sex. I mean, it's pretty clear that the message from the church is that we need to have this conversation and we need it to be all-encompassing. But I think the cultural message that we hear, or at least we choose to hear, is we can provide one really good talk about sex, say you're open to ongoing conversations, and then never bring it up again. And then kids will have a maturation class, which in Utah is just abstinence only, so it doesn't teach what you guys think it teaches probably. And they'll learn from their church classes. They'll get the dirty cupcake example or whatever. I never got those talks. Ours was always on pornography. I think that's what boys and young men get, the talk on pornography, and women get the talk that if you cross the lines, then you're this dirty cupcake or something, and that's not true. So.
I just went to a maturation class, fifth grade, they do that. And it's just the basics, to show the bodies and stuff. And there were kids hiding themselves, like there was one little girl hunched in a ball, and was like, why didn't your mom come? Like it made me sad for her, just because they show naked boys and girls up there what their bodies look like. But then one little girl's like, she's talking about something, she says, so how do you actually make the baby? How does the egg get in there? Like, just a normal question that should have been answered. And she's like, you need to go and talk to your mom about that. That's how she ended it. And luckily the mom was there, and I watched the kid go straight to the mom, and she said, did I say something wrong? And mom said, when we get home, we'll talk about it, and I'll tell you everything. So I was like, oh, so glad this kid's mom was there, because it was so sad to watch her just go, what?
Thank you for sharing that story, because I think I was going to ask, what message do you think that the child received? And she said it. Did I say something wrong? She's already at, what did you say, the 5th grade? She's already receiving this confusing message that maybe there's something wrong with that. This is a hush-hush thing. I talk about it in private, at home, with my mom, and I hit a topic that a lot of people are anxious about. And that's going to send, those messages are probably just going to continue to be perpetuated. So 2 more. From religion, from the church, intimacy does not occur in a vacuum, isolated from other human relationships, from values, or from our perception of ourselves and others. It is only one part, although a very important part, of our relationships with others. Teaching human intimacy to our children is only one of many ways in which we help them prepare for eternal life, but it is a very important responsibility we have toward our children. I just want to hit home the point that we are receiving the direction and the guidance from the brethren that we need to be having these conversations. And you'll see this later, but a lot of conversations, not just like one really, really awesome conversation in a Sunday parlor or ice cream parlor, but like a lot of conversations. So culturally, though, I think we receive the message, we just need to shut down their sexuality until they get married. Then they will figure it out. And like you said, in our culture, you don't talk about it, though. Once you're married, it's only between the husband and the wife that they talk about it. Maybe they might be able to talk to a bishop, and maybe they might be able to talk to parents if it's really, really bad, and possibly talk to a therapist. But that's like dire situations, like DEFCON 9, then you do that. Did I see a hand? No? Okay. So I've talked about the new talk, and there's a couple people that just walked in. So the new talk it's going to deconstruct a couple components of the old talk, that it was a one and done sort of conversation, and also that it's an ongoing conversation. It's an ongoing conversation, and it's a, what's it called? It's kind of like a daily, normal, non-formalized conversation, because that's what it always has been, is this really formal, strange thing. I'll talk to you at home about this, kind of like you're in trouble. That's like a conversation you'd have with a kid that was in trouble. I'll talk to you about this at home. So I want everyone to be prepared to know what topics related to the talk, or the new talk, that they should be discussing. And as I discussed, intimacy in our culture equals sex, but intimacy in the world is a lot more broad than that. It's connection, it's feeling loved, it's feeling accepted, it's good communication, it's those types of things. Sexuality, you guys can figure out what that is, and I'll talk more about these details, or these in a minute. Biology and reproduction, there's some crossover, but a lot of people talk about them as if they're one and the same. Like there was a comment up here about it being reproduction. You know, the talk that they got was basically a reproduction talk. So got one of these points, probably okay, superficially, maybe even really good, but then you miss all these other aspects of the talk. So those are the 4 different aspects you need to keep in mind when you're having this new talk. Like I said, I've done this presentation a couple times, and one of the questions that I've gotten is, when should we start? I have a 3-year-old, or a 7-year-old, or a newborn. You know, when do I need to start? Is it different for boys than it is for girls? And like I said, I wanted to get a lot of comments basically from the church, and so I actually got this right off of the church's website. Did anyone know that they had this detailed information about what to discuss with your kids? So, and I have a link in the resource at the last page so you guys can get that. But it's basically a handbook on parenting. So children are always old enough to begin learning. Our bodies are, so these are the pieces that you can always teach them. From a newborn, clear until, the end of their life, really. Is our bodies are amazing gifts from a loving Heavenly Father. And these are going to be these are developmentally going to be altered as the child grows, and the child learns and asks questions, and it's going to range from kid to kid. If you have 2 boys, I've got 2 boys and a girl. When my first, I can guarantee you, when my first gets to 10, I will be telling him very different things than I'll be telling my second when he gets to 10. Because my first is already totally into girls. He identifies the ones that he thinks are pretty right off the bat. He doesn't tell Dad, but I can tell. I know my son well enough. He's and this has been going on for a couple of years, and he's only 6. My second son, he's a lot more confident about people that he likes. There's this neighbor girl. She's like 3 times his age, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna marry Vivian. I'm like, okay, there you go. But he doesn't really care about all the details right now about sex or sexuality. He'll get that teaching whether he is asking for it or not, because that's an important thing. Sometimes kids will ask for it, and you can kind of follow their lead, but other times children won't ask for it. And that doesn't mean follow their lead and don't talk about it. Because I had a case I was supervising once, and this woman, there was a couple that came in, this woman never asked any questions about sex. And so her parents thought, well, I'll follow her lead. They were probably really happy too. She's not asking any questions, so I'm not gonna tell her anything. This is perfect. But if she did ask, we would totally tell her. And she gets married and ends up in therapy because they're really frustrated that sexual intimacy isn't working for them. And what she needed ongoing conversations. She needed her parents to identify that she's a little different than the other kids. She's not gonna go and ask these questions. So we need to kind of fill it out and present her with opportunities to have those discussions or to bring it up with her. And then she'll have an understanding, i.e. she'll have a life preserver for herself throughout her life, because it didn't serve as this education as a life preserver when she got married. It actually was, just her drifting off into these troubled waters. So we need to be teaching our kids developmentally. Our bodies are amazing gifts from a loving Heavenly Father. It's important to respect our bodies and take good care of them. Positive and respectful physical affection between family members and spouses, and modesty and why certain parts of our bodies are special and should remain covered. And you guys can sort of think about or conceptualize how that might evolve from a 3-month-old. Not that the 3-month-old is really going to conceptualize what you're saying, but the way in which you talk about certain parts of their body, they're gonna pick up on mom saying pleasant things, dad saying pleasant things to me. As the child develops, they're going to identify they feel really uncomfortable when they're changing my diaper, or if I'm touching myself. As they age and they're a year old. And they're in the bathtub and they're touching themselves, because if you don't have kids, that's gonna, just a newsflash, that's gonna happen. And so they're gonna identify all of these things. So developmentally, you need to figure out how to implement these conversations into their growth and development.
So I work with kids specifically, and there's a whole bunch of clients right now who are coming to me with pornography issues. Little kids, not even kidding, 6, 7, 8, 9, like it's insane right now what's happening. Parents are so unprepared for the internet right now. And what I'm finding shocking to me, because that's not how I'm raising my children, is these children don't know these words at all. They don't know the word pornography. What is that word? Especially the little, the 9, 10, they've never heard that word. And they don't know what sex is. And what I'm finding is that parents are scared. They're scared to say, this is what sex is. This is, even the little stuff. Like I always start with safe touch, right? Which is a curriculum that we teach children about who can touch their bodies and who can't touch their bodies and what parts are not. That's the safe touch curriculum that we do. And then as we move on, and they're in those ages, and we let them know what sex is, right? But it's such a broader thing. So when I ask my kids, so what is sex? What are you going to say? And they say, well, it's where mommy and daddy are kissing naked. That's what they know sex to be, right? At that particular age. And they all know it at different ages, and then when you hit a certain age, then you show the rest of sex. So what I'm amazed at is they're not scared because the kids aren't asking questions. They're scared that if they tell them, they're so curious, they're going to go look. But it's the opposite of that that's happening. I'm like, it's the opposite, This mom's like, my kid has Netflix, and they saw this title that was like, there's some Netflix show that's like, sex in the, I don't know, it has sex in the title. So she went and watched 3 or 4 seasons of that to find out what sex was. right? I just need to know. Or they're watching these, I'm sorry, I'm so adamant about this because I'm like, please teach your kids, right? But just like they're watching a YouTube video and they say the word sex, right? And you can't have nudity on YouTube, right? But they say a lot of those words, and so then they're like, what is that? Then they Google it, and then they're like taken down this rabbit hole of just terrifying stuff. And their parents have no idea until they catch them like 4 months later, and they're like, my 7-year-old's an addict. And you're like,
Well, and I have some really good quotes about that, but there really is no research that says that if you spark these conversations, you're going to flip a switch in them and turn them into these sexual kids. There's no research that supports that. Actually, if anything, the research supports the opposite. And if you're really, really curious about a good curriculum, the Netherlands does an amazing job with how to teach kids about sex. They have like I can't remember what they call it, but it's a whole week for all of the kids at every different age. So you got kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all the way on up. They have a whole week where it's kind of like this celebration, and they talk about various components, developmentally appropriate, related to sexuality. And it's not just intercourse. They talk about what it feels like to be hugged or kissed by mom or dad, intimacy pieces. They talk about biology. Their fifth graders would run circles around our fifth graders in terms of their knowledge about biology and reproduction. And a lot of people would think that what that's going to produce is it's going to produce this over-sexualized culture. But they're very similar to the United States in how they generally view relationships. They're more monogamous, not that they all are monogamous, but they're more monogamous. They have fewer regrets about first sexual encounters, where here in the US we have a lot more regrets about first sexual encounters. They have fewer STIs or STDs, fewer unwanted or unplanned pregnancies than we do here in the United States. And it's interesting, forever ago, I can't remember exactly when it was, but the United States and the Netherlands were at the same place. And they essentially said, we've got to do something, we've got to teach our kids one way or the other about sexuality. And the United States went the direction that we went, and they went this really open direction. And so I don't know if the United States will ever follow them, and I'm not saying that we need to change the curriculum in the schools, but what I am saying is that we have the responsibility within the home to have a certain dialogue with our kids. So thank you for your comments. So these are the quotes that I was talking about. This is from the church's website. So it's not just Anthony. It is really important for parents of young children to understand that there is no research that supports the notion that earlier discussions and exposure to sexual or teaching healthy sexuality draws children into pornography use earlier or causes that they are switched on too early. Parents who openly speak with their children about sexuality prepare them for situations they may find themselves in and typically have fewer children who become sexually active in their teens. This life preserver concept. So here are some components of intimacy that you can start talking to your kids about, or you can communicate to parents that you're working with. Knowing and liking yourself is an essential piece and component to having intimacy. It's really hard to have intimacy with anyone if you don't really know and like yourself, right? Trusting and caring relationships, intimacy is fostered and grows within those, having honesty and having clear communication. And they support it. They sustain what we're saying. So I should have made this slide a little bit bigger. So this is what the church says in relation to my previous slide about intimacy needing to be there and present. It says, this is D&C 88:15, if you guys can't read that. And the spirit and the body are the soul of man, the spirit and the body. Discuss the relationship between the spirit, body, and soul. Talk about how sexual intimacy affects both our spirits and our physical bodies. When both physical and spiritual union take place in a marriage, the souls of both individuals can experience great joy. What They can experience that. I think that's so different, this last sentence, that's so different than what you receive in our culture, right? The cultural message that you receive is it's a wholesome, spiritual sexual encounter, period. And the physical piece, it gets left off. But this, from the church's website, in reference to DNC, is saying that both the spiritual and the physical are important. That makes up the soul, and the soul can experience great joy within this relationship. Also, if we understand healthy sexuality in the context of it being divine, we are tying into our divine identity. That is like mind-blowing, right? If our culture believed that, we'd probably have families that, instead of having 12 kids, had like 24 kids. But you're literally tying into your divine identity and our divine potential and the divine potential of our spouse and of our eternal family. I think usually what is heard is, if we understand healthy sexuality in the context of being divine, skip all this other stuff that's actually longer, and then you go down to here, and of our eternal family. I think it misses that it's the divine potential of our spouse, our divine identity, and our divine potential. I think we skip over all that, and we just go down to healthy sexuality is for our eternal family, essentially, and we skip the rest of it.
That's what I got from my mom and dad. And I just remember her telling me, like, sex can be such a spiritual experience. I just remember that as a teenager going, Mom, stop talking about sex, right? But my parents drilled that into us. We knew that. And so that's healthy and good. I'm going to drill that into my kids. I've already told them that a couple times.
Well, and I think, a piece focusing on the spiritual part is so correct, so right. But it's like this woman said up here, that it's only half the story. And the physical is amazing, divinely prescribed in our divine potential. So this is the WHO, the World Health Organization. This is their statement in regards to sexuality, in defining sexuality. And before I read it, I remember taking, it's always nostalgic for me to come back to BYU. I always like coming back here, but I was thinking when I was doing this presentation or getting this ready, I was thinking about a religion class I had, a Book of Mormon class that I had. And I'd like to say I remember lots and lots of things from that class. But I remember one thing, but it was pretty substantial. I remember the professor saying that there are truths that you will find, he's not just talking to me, I wish he was, but there are truths that we will find throughout life and that are from the world. And those truths will be seen also in the gospel. And so one of our activities or our assignments was go and find truths that you can see out in the world that relate back to what our religion says concerning truths. And so whenever I find one of those, whenever I find that pairing, I like to highlight it. And so I've literally highlighted it here. So the World Health Organization says sexuality is a central aspect of being human. Throughout life encompasses sex, gender, identities and roles, eroticism, pleasure, etc. Sexuality is experienced and expressed in thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behaviors, practices, roles, and relationships. So one of the things that I find as an issue, and not this life preserver, for people that haven't had a lot of discussion and conversation about these four aspects of the new talk that you guys are going to have with your kids, is that it's not a central part of who they are as they're going throughout their day, as they're getting ready, as they're talking to people, as they're interacting with the world. It's more of this remote thing that you go and access once you get married, and you only do that, you only access it when you're married and you guys decide that you want to have sex, and then you just kind of put it away in the closet, and then you get back, you access it later when you guys want to have another kid, or if you want to have a fun time together. And that theory, I think, I like the idea of that, because that sounds kind of cool. I like to compartmentalize things. I guess I'm a stereotypical guy. But I don't think that works. At least it hasn't worked for anyone that I have ever worked with. It needs to be a part of who the person is, a central aspect of being human. Because that's what we're seeing from the church. That's what the world is saying. So another truth is the World Health Organization's definition about sexual health. Sexual health is a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It is not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. That's the most important part there. Sexual health requires not true. This is all good. It's all good. Disregard what I said. Sexual health requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. For sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. I think, if I'm remembering right, okay, I've got a statement from the church that is very, very similar to that, that I love. And so this is what I'm saying, these truths that the world's putting out there, this is one of the truths that the world is putting out there that relates to our understanding what our leaders are saying. You can best teach your children that intimacy between husband and wife must be guided by righteous attitudes towards each other. The most sacred intimacy must be shared in a relationship characterized by genuine love. I think that's one of the main pieces that you saw in the last statement. If we truly love others and desire their eternal joy, if we are our brother's keeper, our intimate relations as husband and wife will uplift rather than degrade. Right? I think that's also a big statement that you heard before. Virtuous behavior, however, I love this. Virtuous behavior, however, does not reject the feeling and joy of the physical senses, but provides a full and satisfying enjoyment of them. Let that sink in, because I think that is opposite from what you hear from our culture. But this is right from the church's website, lds.org. I can't remember where I found this one. But virtuous behavior, however, does not reject the feeling and joy of the physical senses, but provides a full and satisfying enjoyment of them. That's beautiful, I think. Genuine love, love unfeigned, leads us to lawful and righteous relationships, to compassionate but chaste relationships outside of marriage, and to righteous intimacy within marriage. Okay, so we talked about intimacy, and we talked about sexuality, right? In this new talk, you guys are following me? The third thing, we got four. The third thing is biology. So biology for boys, these are general topics that you're going to address. And our biological changes happen when new hormones and doses are released of hormones. And this varies from boy to boy, girl to girl. But timing of puberty, genitalia and pubic hair, growing, voice change, body hair, acne, right? Those might be the conversations that you had or that you've heard of parents having with their kids. For girls, timing of puberty, breasts, pubic hair, growing, first period, menstruation, and acne. And I have a statement that relates to biology and reproduction, but it kind of combines the two of those from the church. And I love it because it's a lot more detail-oriented than you would think would come right off the church's website. It's like in a medical book or something, their description. So it's wonderful that the church is sending us these messages, but I think they're not really getting through and changing our culture as quickly as I think they want it to. And I'm just assuming, because I obviously don't talk to any of them, but I'm just assuming that they want it to happen more quickly than it is. So reproduction. What you would include in this aspect is all the elements necessary for procreation: semen, insemination, fetal growth, labor, nursing, nourishment. I put nourishment in there and I left it in there because when I presented last, I presented to a lot of people that were adoptive parents. And so some of them these parents are not nursing, and so they're providing nourishment. I decided to leave it in because I think it relates to more people than everyone realizes. So this is what the church says in relation to the conversations we need to have with our kids about biology. And this is the one that seems like it's right from a medical journal or something. In just a second. So they say, you should prepare your children for the changes that accompany puberty before these changes actually begin. The processes are clean, good, and divinely mandated. I thought that was a really interesting use of those words. So biology and reproduction, not just reproduction, but biology also are divinely mandated. So girls menstruate, hips broaden, breasts develop, body hair grows under arms and pubic area, and may gain weight. Boys create seminal fluid and sperm cells, shoulders broaden, muscles expand, voice deepens, and get taller and heavier. Body hair grows under arms, on the face, and pubic region. Millions of sperm grow in the testicles within spermatic fluid. When fluid and sperm fill tubules and testes, they are automatically released or ejaculated during sleep, and it's called nocturnal emissions or wet dreams. Sexual dreams are not always present, but they can trigger a nocturnal emission or ejaculation. In either case, this is not masturbation. And I've had some clients come in that really struggle with that. And they feel like, well, I have all these sexual dreams, or I wake up and I just had an orgasm. Like, I feel really bad about that. And so the church has their statement on that. Either way, whether there's a dream there or not, it's not masturbation. Just to reiterate, there was those 4 points that you guys are keeping in mind as we're continuing on. And I don't mind if you guys get up and you get a drink or you guys get food too, because I get to walk around and you guys have to sit there. So we've got intimacy, sexuality, biology, and reproduction. These are 3 different categories. So newborn to 3 years, 4 years old to 11 years old, 12 years old to 18-year-olds, and then I also included a marriage stage in here. Pretty much what's happening from newborn to 3 years old is recognition of gender. So newborn to 3-year-olds are going to be trying to figure out what gender they are. And this happens through genital exploration. They are touching all their various body parts. Parents oftentimes really help with this to a certain extent, and then they stop. These are your fingers. It feels like this when you touch. I always did this with our kids when we were at church, and I'd be walking in the halls because you can't go to any classes. I'd touch the walls with their hands, and I'd talk about what it feels like, and they're going to grow up and have all these issues because their dad's a therapist. But I would do that with them, and this is the classic, thing that you'd have at the church. This is always usually more rough than it is here, but you'd talk about that. You talk about these are your feet, this is your nose, these are your eyes, but very rarely are parents saying, and this is your penis, these are your testicles, this is your vulva, this is your clitoris. But kids are exploring those parts of their bodies. If parents are a little bit more progressive, and this isn't just within the church, this is everywhere. If parents are a little bit more progressive, they may say to their son, yes, that's your penis, or yeah, that's your penis, and then quickly put on the diaper, or try to distract them or something as quickly as they possibly can. They very rarely will say, and I noticed this even in the church's website, they'll very rarely say, and this is your vulva, and this is your clitoris, to the girl. Even if the little girl baby on the changing table or in the tub is exploring her body. So is it any wonder that a lot, not all, but a lot of women grow up differentiated from their sexuality? If it never got named, if it was never discussed in these conversations, if they only heard messages that it's for reproduction, is it any wonder that you have women that are growing up that aren't really enjoying sexual intimacy, aren't understanding that part of their body, that are really confused about why it feels this way? Should I be okay that it feels this way? I mean, to me, it's kind of a no-brainer that that's what would happen. That's what would come from that. It's like the same thing if you, with arms, you never labeled them, you never taught, they never learned how to move them, they never accessed them at all, they just walked throughout their life without using their arms, and then it's like you get married, boom, you should be able to use those and be a college quarterback. It just wouldn't happen. It would be really, really difficult. Not that it's impossible, but it provides some challenges. It doesn't become a life preserver for these people, where it would for your guys' kids, where you're going to have these conversations. So the male infant's genitals are very sensitive to touch. The penis responds to his diaper. This is from the church's website. Diaper and to his parents' touch as they bathe or clothe him. He will often touch and rub his own genitals. A little girl may also explore and handle her genitals. There was a little bit more that they included in there. But they labeled the boy's penis. They didn't label the girl's vagina or vulva or clitoris. And I'm trying to think if they ever did in any of the things that I read. I don't think they labeled any of those. But yet they are saying, I'm not saying talking bad, I'm just saying it's so deeply entrenched in our culture and in society. It's even more than our culture. It's in society that women don't get a lot of the same conversations. And it is a little bit harder because women have more internal female genitalia, and some of their genitalia is more difficult to see, like a clitoris, for instance. A penis is easier to see for a little boy than a clitoris is for a little girl. So it makes some sense, but women need to have the same conversations that men get to have, or little boys get to have. Your reaction, so this is also from their website, your reaction to these natural explorations will influence the way a child later feels about his procreative powers. Do not either worry about or encourage the child's exploration. Remain neutral, and the child will accept that these parts of their body are good just as all the other parts are. To me, I think that's like a huge statement, because I don't think that our culture would say to do that. I think if you just polled like 100 people from Utah County, just randomly grabbed LDS parents, I think that they wouldn't say to do that. I think they would say, the church says we shouldn't do that. But the church is saying, remain neutral. Don't encourage it. Don't discourage it. They're just trying to figure out their body. And it's not masturbation. I was just going to ask.
Just with that, I think those opportunities for not discouraging can actually be a good teaching moment to teach them, because you don't want them. I see children develop masturbation problems innocent, like without any sexual abuse. So some teaching needs to happen there. And I'm no expert, still figuring it out too. But I remember my daughter, and this is just one of those glorious parenting moments where it's like, thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving me the words, because I wish I could say all of my reactions to their exploration have been this way. But she was showering, and I don't remember what happened. She was probably 5 or 6, and she said, Mom, how come it feels good when I touch down here? And thank Heavenly Father, I felt like words came out like, it does feel good, doesn't it? And we had this little conversation about, that's exactly how it's supposed to be. And I just felt like, oh, this is so awesome. Thank you for this help. But we had this great conversation about how good it feels, and that's exactly how it's supposed to be. But Heavenly Father also doesn't want us to play with those parts. He has really important reasons for that to feel good. And we'll talk about that later. She was too young to go into details about it, but and we just moved on. Like, she's like, okay, like it was no big deal to her, and I was like, oh, we just had a sex talk. But it was such a good lesson for me to learn, like, yes, glorify that it feels good, but also teach. There's a reason it feels good. Heavenly Father made it that way, and there's times when it's okay, and there's times when it's not.
Yeah, that's the perfect way to handle that interaction. I wouldn't add anything else to that or take anything away. That was perfect. And I always lead off with the positive too. I'll always say to my kids, it does feel so good, doesn't it? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that amazing that Heavenly Father created your body that way? That is so cool. And then developmentally, depending on where they're at, you can have those follow-up conversations or talk about the other aspects.
So when my daughter said hers, it was because she was watching someone kiss on TV, and she wondered why it was tingly down there or something like that. And but she didn't like it. She's like, I don't like it. And I said, well, it's a normal thing. It's totally normal. People have that. I have it. We have it. If you don't like it, you can look away when that's happening. If someone's kissing on TV, just look away. If you don't like it, then you won't have that. And she's like, okay. So she never watches people kiss on TV. She's 14. Just this. She's like, don't want that feeling. So I don't know where to go from there right now, but I do think it's interesting, like the shock of it for that first, like, what do I say?
Yeah, and sometimes people, I've met with some people that don't like the arousal feeling, but sometimes it's just a confusing thing. Like, I've never felt anything like this. I think sometimes what they're saying without being able to say the words is, I've never felt anything like this. I don't really know how I feel about it. I kind of feel bad about it, or I feel like it's just this weird thing. I'd just rather not explore it and try to figure out what that is. And so I think for some people, it's kind of like this question mark. And because they can't name it, label it, they haven't experienced anything like that, sometimes they categorize it as, I really don't like it. So 4 to 11 years old is role identity, and it's basically who they are in relationship to other people. And then I have included some teaching points here. So parents can help children to establish during these years a good foundation for later intimacy by helping them understand true principles about how a son or daughter of God should relate to others in his or her gender roles. And it can be, like I said, that's this life preserver. And if you remember from earlier on, so you're embedding these little conversations developmentally throughout their life that build upon each other in regards to intimacy, sexuality, biology, and reproduction, that grow into something else. So now, 4 to 11 years old, you're still talking about how to take care of their bodies, but taking care of their bodies as an 11-year-old is very different from taking care of your body as a 3-year-old. And I've sadly had men, and more so women, not be taught how they need to take care of their bodies. I had one woman that I worked with, she did not like to have anything to do with her vulva, her vagina. She would like quickly soap, if even that, but she would get a lot of infections because she didn't have this healthy relationship with her body. She didn't have some of these conversations requisite to it being a life preserver, these conversations being a life preserver. So differentiate between intimate relationships and other kinds of relationships. So some examples are courteous relationships, affectionate or intimate. This is the big point in here. Gender differences are complementary in nature. Each gender completes the purpose of the other's creation. There's what are their names? They teach in the School of Family Life. Dean Busby and Jason Carroll and somebody else, I think that's who wrote it. Sexual Wholeness in Marriage. You guys familiar with that? That's a really good book, by the way. They talk about how one partner, usually the man, is the one that makes sure sex happens, but the woman usually makes sure that sex is good and quality. That it's not just about the physical and rushed and quantity, but that it's good, fulfilling, wholesome, enjoyable, pleasurable sexual experience. Does that make sense? Yeah. Sexuality as they become ready to learn. So 4 to 11, that's a big gap. And like I said, my kid at 4 years, my first at 4 versus my second at 4 were very different in terms of these things. And so you've really got to have good relationships with your kids and understand them well enough to know that, where they're at, what you should be talking about and discussing with them. Okay, the last age range, and then we're going to go into marriage. Yes, you're fine.
Because this might be way off topic, because you can shut it down. But I have a lot of friends in the LGBT community, right? And a lot of them will say that they knew that they were gay, I mean, like 8 years old, right? Like when they had their first crush. And so would you change anything about the way, right? Because so many parents are afraid, like, oh, if I talk about sexuality that they want to talk about, then I'm going to solidify it. So how would you guide parents whose children want to have those conversations about same-sex attraction?
Well, I would think that trying to shut them down or pigeonhole them or get something tied down might be more damaging than just allowing them to express themselves. And that may be really hard for a parent to go through. I don't think there's lots of parents, especially conservative or LDS parents, that are like, oh, I hope that's an experience that I get to have. So I think that having support, making sure that the relationship, the marriage is strong enough that they can go to their spouse and say, this is tough for me because he or she is expressing these things and I don't want them to be gay, or I don't want them to be transgender. And so I think they really need to have that support, and maybe even tie into the community that you're linked with. But I would encourage them to be able to openly discuss and explore things, because that's going to have a huge impact on things like suicidality and depression and adjustment and safety and future relationships. And so I think I think it can be, in some ways, more of a challenge for parents than it could be a kid. So.
I attended a conference last year here at BYU in the summer about this topic, and it came up. They said that there are many children, even older than the little ones we're talking about right now, that are in their teenage years, and just because of all the media, and there's just everything out there about this, they have lots of questions about their own sexuality. And so the general consensus, that at least that I got from that, was that you should allow them to discuss, you should discuss with them, but you should say, don't make any decisions about this right now. You're too young to really know for sure what's going on with you yet. And that's probably true clear up until they're maybe 20.
Yeah. Well, and that is an amazing statement. That's a great statement. Can I add something really quick, and then we'll go to you? In keeping with this idea that these conversations are going to help people and preserve them from maybe having difficulty that they otherwise wouldn't need to have, I think sometimes people confuse intimacy, not the LDS cultural definition of intimacy, with sexuality. And so if you're having these conversations, they may identify that, well, I have intimate feelings towards my girlfriend that I play soccer with, or that I play chess with, or that I hang out with, but that doesn't mean that I necessarily have sexual feelings for her. Or does that make sense?
And arousal can happen to anybody from different genders. Like, I know my husband was really confused as a little boy, like, and even getting older into teenage years, why he would be aroused from other guys, like in the locker room, and why he would have erections, and that was very confusing for him, and he didn't have anybody to talk to. It took a long time for him to figure out that's normal, that's just normal. And also, I think, with this question, just the idea of addressing a lot of what you were saying, like, you don't have to figure that out yet, but also helping them identify there's a lot more to you than just your sexual preference. Like, there's so many things that identify you, helping them explore and identify and define themselves by all of these other things as well.
Yeah, I think society, I think it was you that said this, society, there's a lot in the media and society right now about sexual and gender minorities, and it's important that we have those conversations, but I think it's like our society's narrative, and it's on our minds. It's on everyone's minds. And so they're narrowing their focus. Youth are narrowing their focus to those aspects. And I like your statement about, yeah, so you're feeling some of those things. Okay, that's great that you feel like that, and allow them to express it and have open conversations, and also have broaden it to other conversations, other topics, so their focus isn't narrowly pinpointed on what is my gender, what is my sexual preference or sexuality. And that's something that I can figure out as time goes on, and it's not a pressing thing that I have to make that decision now. Let's go here, and then I think you had to come on over, maybe not.
Okay, so one of the questions that came up, I think, was on these slides is, so thinking about sex education, so all of these slides that people are covered slides, how do you adjust it when they're members versus non-members, or your clients that are non-members? Tell me how you adjust that sex education.
So you should have gone to the last presentation I did, because I didn't include anything about religion in it. So you can still keep those first four components that I talked about in the new talk, so sexuality, biology, and you can use, that's why I have in like the World Health Organization, what they're saying, things that are not religiously focused, and I have some other research that supports these types of conversations need to happen, the Netherlands, what they're doing there, the topics that they're addressing. So you could pretty much take out all of the religious quotes and slides, and you could use all of the stuff that's left to have those conversations with people that are non-members or that maybe don't want religion to have anything to do with this discussion with their kids about sex.
Have you found as far as, so maybe working with non-members or people that as far as with just their sexuality, that they approach it differently, or their mindset is different on some of the principles?
Well, I think yeah. I mean, yes. I think they're more open. They're more open to gender fluidity. They're more open to their kids being sexual minorities or gender minorities. But I'm seeing, and maybe it's just because I work around here and I deal a lot with LDS clients, I'm seeing an even bigger shift in the LDS population and how they are seeing it. I'm seeing a lot more liberal LDS younger LDS members that are viewing all of these topics drastically different from an older age cohort that came before them. So I see a big change there. But I think there's a lot more just openness to that variation outside of a religious context. So, let's see. So this is just basically, it's a continuation is what's happening. So you have these two statements. Throughout childhood, boys and girls have touched their own genitals frequently to wash and to dress. This is a behavior that usually has the same meaning as keeping one's feet warm in the winter, enjoying a swim on a hot summer day, or scratching an itch. We ought to be friendly to our bodies from the church. We ought to be friendly to our bodies and appreciate the body's marvelous range of senses. Senses. That's not spirituality or connectedness necessarily, but marvelous range of senses. It's interesting. They're saying not to go, and it continues on, not to go and basically seek out these things that are going to be pleasurable and arousal, but as boys and girls are growing and they're changing and they're dressing and showering and stuff, that they're going to experience arousal essentially. And it's important to say, this is awesome that my body does this. This is awesome that my body feels this way. It's working right. Great. It's going to be cool when I'm married and I can explore these things. Learn to interact properly with members of the opposite sex. When they do not speak of their awakening sexual interest as sinful or unclean. So it's saying, the church is saying, we need to be basically excited, celebrate, know that this is a normal part of the process to have this sexual awakening and to have these conversations with kids, well, with teenagers, that you're right on track. This is what you should be experiencing. You're going through a sexual awakening. That's the stage of life that you're in, and having ongoing conversations about that. So in marriage, and this is, in my practice, I mostly work with couples or individuals, but that struggle with sexuality. Some of them, it'll be out of control sexual behavior and sexual addiction. But the majority of them, they're couples that just struggle with sexuality. They have a sexual disorder, arousal disorder, pain disorder, low satisfaction, different sexual preferences, just a whole range of things. That's the majority of my clients. And so I wanted to include this in here because it's important to see where you're trying to help your kids go, or the kids that you guys are working with, or the parents that you guys are working with. And it's also important for parents to be at this place, because if they're not there, they certainly aren't going to be able to help their kids get to this place. So sexual expression is ordained of God. The Savior taught that a man should cleave to his wife, and the two should be one flesh. President Kimball said, "It is the destiny of men and women to join together to make eternal family units. In the context of lawful marriage, the intimacy of sexual relations is right and divinely approved. There is nothing unholy or degrading about sexuality in itself between a husband and his wife, for by that means men and women join in a process of creation and in an expression of joy or love." So there's two pieces, creation and expression of love. We often miss that second piece, like you said early on. And this just continues, this, I guess, helps a couple and future, your kids or future kids understand what it's going to be like to take all of this learning. So you have those 4 components that we talked about in the new talk. They're incorporating these developmentally into their children's lives, and some of it is learning in relation to other people, like role identity or identification, or how they feel when they see an attractive guy or attractive girl or a couple kiss, or those types of things, or when they kiss somebody else. But the rubber really meets the road when they get married. But it's not going to happen very well or very easily if they haven't had many, many, many conversations and discussions at different levels throughout their life about those various aspects. Because within a conservative culture or somebody or a couple that waits till they get married, this is more so what they can expect and what it's going to be like. The first night requires nearly perfect courtesy, consideration, and in many cases, a gentle sense of good humor. They must realize that the greatest passions of marriage lie ahead to increase over the years through experience and growth. And I think she said this essentially, that the greatest passions of marriage lie ahead to increase over the years through experience and growth. I think most of the time in our culture, we expect to just get it. You flip on a switch once after you guys leave the temple, and it's going to work, and everything's going to be awesome. And if all these other conversations and experiences and things that you're telling your body and thinking about your body haven't taken place, it's not going to be that. I grew up as an electrician. My dad was an electrical contractor, and ironically, I just wired my basement, and it was really hard to remember how to do it because it's been like 15 years. But behind a switch, there can be many different wires and a circuit of wires that leads back essentially to the panel, which is where the power is. And I think a lot of times in our culture we have this idea that you just put a switch, the plate and the switch on the wall, and you can flip it once you get married. But they don't have all the circuitry behind it, all the years and experiences and discussions behind it that are going to make that switch actually work. And that's I think, what the brethren are talking about here. Last statement here. The honeymoon ought to be a time when the partners learn about one another's minds, emotions, bodies, and spirits. And a lot of times, it's just learning about each other's bodies, and that feels very incongruent, feels very different from what their courtship was like. And sometimes they say, my spouse was like a different person. Once we got married or once we were in the bedroom, it was a completely different person that I was with or I continue to be with. And so people struggle sometimes bringing all of those components, mind, body, and spirit, into their sexual relationship. And that really happens if they can do this stuff early on. They can have these conversations with their parents, and they can have this awareness throughout their life. There are two pieces that need to be deconstructed about the old talk. And the first is they need to have ongoing conversations with their kids. And the second is that it cannot be formalized. And I'll go over why both of those are right here. I've already talked about that first one enough. The second point, not enough time to accurately address all aspects. In the one and done conversation, usually what happens, and I've heard a couple different versions of this throughout the years, is a parent will say, I'm going to take my kid and we're going to go to out to eat, or we're going to go get ice cream together, and we're going to sit in the dark corner of the ice cream parlor and eat our ice cream very anxiously because this is strange and weird, and I never get to spend time with dad alone and he's acting weird, or mom alone and she's acting weird, and where are all the other kids, and why aren't we sitting by the rest of the people in the restaurant? And we're going to have a shocking conversation that we've never had before about all of these various aspects of life that I'm not even aware of. And then dad or mom is going to say, but it's normal and it's healthy and it's good, and let's have this talk again. And the kid's thinking, there is no way in the world, not even for another ice cream, am I going to have this talk. And because of that, the two things, it makes it really difficult to have ongoing conversations if it was done in this formal way. And if you were 12 years old, or your kids were 12 years old when that happened, because now you're going out of the norm. Like, I've had 12 years of my life and you haven't told me that I have a penis, or you haven't told me that I have a clitoris, or that I'm going to get married and we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and now I'm hearing all this information, and that's a lot, and that's overwhelming. I had So if you remember my case that I talked about earlier that I was supervising, the woman basically had that happen to her. She was the one to choose the family home evening activity, and she wanted to go bowling. And everyone and all of her siblings got to go bowling, but she had to go on a special date with mom. So she couldn't do the activity that she really wanted to do. And she had to go with mom and have this really weird conversation, and it was a shock to her system because this was all new to her, and it was such a traumatic, it was really like a trauma for her. It was a traumatic experience that she had. Instead of it being like the 99th of, however many conversations they would eventually have, 200 conversations, it was the one conversation, and I'm going to spill all the beans, and this is going to be like the shock to your system. There's so much too. Those 4 aspects that I talked about, it's not just like the sperm goes inside the woman's body, a baby attaches to the egg, a baby develops, and then you have childbirth. It's a lot more than that, and so there's not enough time. You'd have to eat like several ice cream cones and maybe have dinner and breakfast at that same place in order to be able to fully have a good conversation. And even then, I could eat probably breakfast, lunch, dinner at Cafe Rio. So even if it was at Cafe Rio, I probably would not be able to cover all of the aspects. Plus, kids need time to process it. Developmentally, they may not be ready for some of those conversations, or they may have questions that are going to come up later. So you have to have ongoing conversations just because of that. The structure of it doesn't fit. You're not usually going to have those interactions with your kids where if they're waiting for another good time to have that talk, they're going to be waiting for a long time until I'm sitting alone with dad or mom in the ice cream parlor, and there's no one else around us, and I'm dying to have this conversation. It just doesn't work. It's going to be easier to have those conversations as mom's driving you home from school. Our neighbor, he's 12 years old, and he came home. His parents are really open with talking about sexuality, and he came home and he's like, Mom, my friend so-and-so was talking about oral sex, and they kept on talking about it, and I had no clue what they were talking about. What is oral sex? And you can tell the kind of relationship that he has with his parents, at least with his mom, to be able to just come home and say that, especially a 12-year-old. Normally they're like, don't want to have anything to do with their parents, but they have had lots of conversations with their kids, and they've had ongoing and non-formal conversations, which made it easy so that when she's driving him home, they could have this discussion, because that's when those conversations are going to be had usually. So ironically, I found several statements from the church saying that we should have ongoing conversations, but I don't think that really gets talked about ever. So the family home evening lesson, so there's a family home evening lesson about sexual intimacy. Came out I want to say 2, maybe 3 years ago. Has anyone ever read it or know about it? So yeah, there's a family home evening lesson on sexual intimacy. Not, don't do pornography, don't look at pornography. They have that one. But they also have one that's like promoting positive, healthy sexuality. It's pretty cool. So the family home evening lesson is meant to be a resource used to begin an ongoing conversation, a conversation that is crucial to an appropriate understanding of sex and how it fits into Heavenly Father's divine plan, rather than a one-and-done talk. An ongoing conversation allows partners to talk candidly with their children as inappropriate commercials on television or inappropriate content appears elsewhere, giving parents a starting point to talk about what children saw and how it made them feel. It is vital that you discuss sexual intimacy with your children on an ongoing basis. Children and teenagers are regularly bombarded with damaging ideas about sex, and you have the opportunity to help them create a positive, gospel-driven understanding of sexual intimacy. He intends for sex to be a beautiful, powerful, and joyful part of our lives, not something evil or corrupt. Sex enables a husband and a wife to have children, express love, and strengthen their spiritual, emotional, and physical bonds. So I don't need to say anymore, right? You guys believe me. The church thinks we should have these ongoing conversations, so we better be doing it. One of the things I really liked in just about all of their statements, unless you're talking about pornography, is that they're positively framed and stated, and that it's the negative aspect of it, this evil or corrupt thing, or that it could be sinful, those things are usually more of a not an afterthought, but a second remark to the first, sex is good and positive, which says to me, at least, that that's how we should be communicating it. That's how we need to be talking about it as a culture, and saying that the second half of the conversation, that it's good, that it's positive, that it's fun, that it feels good, that it connects us. And there are also some pitfalls that we need to be wary of.
I had someone tell me that helped me connect the spiritual and physical realm of sexuality. And that she's described to how a sexual relationship with your spouse is supposed to be charitable. And we really think about charity, it's giving your all to someone else and sacrificing. And I never connected sex with charity. And I thought, well, there's a perfect way of combining how divinely inspired sex is, because that's how we learn to be charitable, is by manifesting it in the bedroom. That was
Yeah. Well, and usually people, I guess maybe ironically, people experience a lot of sexual pleasure when they focus on their partner's arousal. So in turn, it becomes pleasurable and enjoyable because your spouse and partner is enjoying and you're being charitable, giving, loving to them. Okay, I'm out of time. So how can I keep conversations about healthy sexuality ongoing and open? Kindness and understanding, always look for learning and teaching moments. Like I said earlier, some children are not going to have those or provide those teaching moments. My first son will provide lots of those. My second son will provide a decent amount of those. I don't know about my daughter yet, although she knows that she has a vulva and she's 2 years old. And that's kind of important because she also knows she has feet and hands and arms and legs. And so she'll love and respect her body, and she'll see it for what it is and how God created her. At least I hope that continues to move forward. Being frank and honest, you can help your children develop a sense of trust. They'll know that they can come to mom and dad, that they'll have these conversations.
One thing that's an unusual dynamic in a larger family is you have younger children and older children. The older children know more, and so that's a little bit of a hindrance to having open conversations. You have lots of different developmental levels in the same car as you're trying to have these casual open conversations, you know. And so there are times when I think to protect younger children, not too much too soon, you do have to say, let's talk about this later, or just give a little answer and then say, come talk to me later. It has to be a little more formal just because little ones are.
I'm glad you say that because if you have a 17-year-old or you have a kid that's going to be getting married and they're wanting to talk about, everything in detail, and you have a 5-year-old, you don't want to be having those same conversations. But if you've had conversations while that 17-year-old or that soon-to-be married child was younger all throughout their development, they're going to know, oh, it's not this weird formal thing. Like, we're just not going to say this in front of little Timmy. So, was there another?
Well, I was just going to say, along with that, I think Tammy Hill gave this suggestion that I thought was it's been so helpful for me. When kids ask questions that are good questions, you say, that's such a good question, but if it's not the right time or you are caught off guard, say, I really want to answer that. Well, now is not the time, we're running here, or we've got too many listening ears, can we talk about this? And it's been really helpful, especially if I haven't been preparing.
Well, yeah, and so if you need to take a phone call in a minute, maybe there's somebody in the car that shouldn't hear it, maybe there's a neighbor kid and you're like, I don't know if their parents are going to think I'm a weirdo or report me to DCFS, yeah, or I don't know how to answer it, and so that sends a message that I really want to talk about it. I'm so glad you asked that question. But that this is probably, not the time because of this reason or not the right place, but lets them know that you need to be asking these things. I'm so glad you brought this up and we get to talk about this. I just have an example right here. What should I do when I'm aroused? If a kid were to ask that, or you guys kind of remarked about that. That's a gateway into having deeper conversations that can latch onto or attach to their divine potential, who they are as God's children. I mean, it provides so many opportunities. I see some laughs. What is, so who knows what commercial this is? So they did a pretty good job in marketing because everybody knows, they think of a woman in a bikini and a hamburger, they think of Carl's Jr. So that doesn't make me want to go there more, but everyone thinks of Carl's Jr. So this is another conversation. So what does a woman in a bikini have to do with a hamburger? Why would the advertisers try to use her attractiveness to make us think about her, about their restaurant, the father, or did you feel attracted? And these aren't therapist questions, right? Because they're closed questions, but we can go with it. Did you feel attracted? Did you feel like you should turn away? That's why I turned off the TV for a minute. Those feelings of attraction, this is the best part of it. Those feelings of attraction are from our Father in heaven to help us build strong families. I'm attracted to mom, but these advertisers are trying to get us to associate those kinds of feelings with their product. Pretty sneaky, isn't it? This is something I found. But I think that that's a perfect way to segue into those conversations. And this is a message that says, these are great feelings. I have those types of feelings you're having right now, but I have them with mom in a different relationship, in a different dynamic, and it's divinely approved. It's good within this context. But sometimes people will use those feelings for another means. Okay, the second part of deconstructing the old talk for the new talk is that it's part of everyday life and not formalized. We can talk whenever there's need or desire, no special circumstances. I told you about my neighbor. It communicates that sexuality is part of the child's everyday lived experience. It is, so I talked earlier about how sometimes women, and definitely men too, but I see a lot more women that experience this, where they're differentiated from their sexuality. So if you're having ongoing conversations, they identify, this becomes a part of their narrative or their story about who they are. That they are this sexual person, that they are this person that needs and desires and wants intimacy, that has this biology, that has this reproduction. They see it in a positive light, in a positive way, on a regular, ongoing basis. It's not something that they have to access, they have to work really hard to achieve or to access, but it's something that they are, or someone that they are as they're going through their life.
And just an example, so I taught my 2-year-old what a vulva was, because I honestly never knew that it was called a vulva until like a year ago. And so I was like, I'm teaching my daughter that. And she's like, this is my vulva. And she's so excited. So we're trying to like create boundaries, but I thought, good for her.
Yeah.
For she knows what it is, and she's excited that it's part of her.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. And so I'm like, okay, now I just got to keep, she's 2, so we
Yeah.
got a long road ahead of her. But hoping that I can maintain that shamelessness about her body.
Yeah, and she should. Everyone should be like, yes, that's my vulva, that's my penis. Just like they're proud of the rest of their body. We need to teach them about all of their body. And you probably say to your kids, you're beautiful, or you're handsome, or you're strong. You should be sending those positive messages about their sexual anatomy. So that's an awesome message. Let's see, communicate shame or something weird. I told you that bowling experience. There's just this big deal that's made about it, instead of that it's just this normal thing. We don't have to hide in the corner somewhere to have this conversation. I don't have to segregate you from the other kids unless it's developmentally appropriate. And you're sending this message, it is normal, it's good, but the context of the conversation conveys something else. And this is what the church actually had to say about that. Some children receive mixed messages from their parents and leaders, oftentimes hearing that sex is bad, so you should save it for someone you are married to and love, because it's bad. This is right on lds.org, on the church's website. I love that they had that on there. Sex is bad, so save it for someone you love and you care about. Okay. Another message from them, children usually learn subtly and cumulatively from ordinary daily contacts. So not in a one-and-done conversation, or if you're really lucky or unlucky, depending on how the conversation goes or how you feel about it, maybe 2 or 3 conversations. So make these topics part of everyday conversation. Health, happiness, expression of affection and acceptance, exercise, hygiene, maturation, healthy relationships, attraction, friendship, intimacy, not just sex, but general human emotional connections. These are the things, when I was talking about the Netherlands, these are the aspects that they are teaching their kids about, and that they're talking about, or they're teaching their students about, from like kindergarten or preschool all the way, well, the teachers at least, kindergarten or preschool all the way up to high school, and so they have a very different view of all of these aspects of the talk. So does anyone have any scenarios where they've been able to do this? They've been able to slip into this talk, this conversation?
I have more of a question about, I guess, this. I know there's like that fear of telling your child too much too soon, like what they can handle. So how do you gauge when your child's maybe ready to kind of know the biology of like the act of sex itself, rather than just this is like your penis, this is
So I think it really comes down to knowing your kids. So like I said, my first son, he's very tuned into his sexuality. Like he's aware he has a penis. He's aware when it gets erect and all those things. He will probably have pushed those conversations. And so for him, I probably won't have to do a lot of wondering or guessing if I'm having those conversations too early. My second son, I'm going to have to gauge with him about how he responds to some of the conversations that I have. So as you're walking into the waters with them, you see if they're struggling, if they're floundering, if it's getting too deep too fast. So as you start to have those conversations, are they staying with you? Do they seem distracted because they really just want to go play, or because it's uncomfortable? And if it's uncomfortable, does that mean we need to keep having the conversation, or does that mean that I'm probably going to talk about too much too fast? You could also use there's online, you can find lots of resources that say, at this age, these are the types of conversations that you can have. Like I showed earlier with the newborn to 3-year-old, I would just focus on like gender identity and awareness, not like telling them you are a boy or you're a girl, but like letting them explore their body and talk about that. With the 4 to 11-year-old, you're going to be having those other types of conversations. But you can look up online and see like specific things that you might want to talk about with a kid that's 6 years old, or what they're talking about or learning in their class, so that you can have follow-up conversations with them at home. So. Two examples from my life. So my wife and I, we don't get like really, really hot and heavy with kissing, but we'll kiss around our kids, more than just like a peck that's I love you, but we won't full on make out. But they'll know, they know the difference between an I love you kiss and that's intimacy that they're expressing right now. And they smile and giggle, and it does something interesting in the home. It's like it lets them know that it's safe, that mom and dad are together, they love each other, that they're okay, even if they're maybe unsure about the feelings that are going on inside of them, like, oh, this is weird or strange, or I don't know what to think. But I know that ultimately they like that mom and dad have this special thing, this intimacy that's between them. This is my favorite example with my son. So this was when he was 3 years old. He's 4 now. Ironically, I think it was like a week before I did my first presentation on talking to your kids about sex. He, from the bathroom, ran into my room, and he's like, Dad, my penis is filled with blood. It's filled with blood. And he's like so excited. He's like, this is awesome. And I was like, that's so cool, son. It's doing what it's supposed to. And he's like, yeah. And then he went and he got his clothes on and ran out and played with his friends. It didn't like trigger him into this sexual spiral where he's gonna get another person pregnant or something, you know. He felt good, like was said earlier. He felt good about his body. It was this life preserver for him, and it will be this life preserver as he gets older, so he doesn't have these negative feelings about it. He's like, yeah, I'm pretty cool. My body does some cool stuff. So when we often focus on the negative consequences of breaking the law of chastity, it can sometimes be challenging for children to understand that sexual feelings are good. It is important to teach that these feelings are wonderful and can help us develop healthy relationships when they are expressed appropriately. Your ability to have these discussions with your children will have a long-lasting effect on their lives. It will be this life preserver. I'm going to hammer that idea into you guys' minds. So these last couple slides are a little bit different, but this is about changing how we as a culture see and view sexuality, changing our narrative, our cultural narrative. So when I have a book, and I was writing another book. When I was writing this other book, I was writing this chapter about changing our cultural narrative. And my son and I went to a BYU football game, and I like BYU sports, but I'm not like the avid, go to every game sort of a guy, so I want to make sure I'm sending the right message. And I want BYU to win all their sporting events. So there's the disclaimer. But we were there, and we were sitting across from where this wave started. And you guys have probably all either been at a game where all the crowd does a wave and stuff. And I was thinking about it as it happened, because you have the first couple of people that are like these brave souls that say, we're gonna stand up and we're gonna put our arms in the air and we're gonna hope that the other people around us see us doing that and we don't look like fools, and they stand up and they put their arms in the air, and then we'll be the ones that started that wave, and it'll be cool, but I hope it doesn't crash and burn. And I thought that's I think what the church is trying to do, and I'm not the only one out there that's trying to do this, but what I'm trying to do and what other people that are sex positive in our culture are trying to do are essentially trying to do that. They're the people that are standing up, proud, holding their arms in the air, looking around, hoping that other people will say, let's do the wave. Let's start that. Let's make this cultural shift. Let's be more sex positive instead of sex shaming or sex negative. And like the wave, after the first couple of people do that, it moves along pretty quickly, and it catches on, it catches fire. And I have a feeling that it's not too far away from where we're at right now when that will be the dominant message in our culture. That our kids or that their kids are going to grow up receiving these really sex-positive messages. That is going to be very different from what it has been, what the generations before us have received. But if it takes a little bit longer, wouldn't you like your kids to be the ones that are at the forefront of that wave, the ones that are the beneficiaries of healthy sexuality, that actually have this life preserver for their development, for their relationships? I sure hope that my kids are, and so I want you to think about that as you hear maybe talks, or you hear people in your program or at your work talking about sexuality in a positive light. Think about that and think, do I want to be on board with the first couple of people that are doing the wave, or do I want to wait till it comes back around and then stand up and think that I'm brave because I'm standing up now? I think we can all stand up a little bit sooner, and we can make that shift happen a little quicker. This is a statement about why it's vital now, and it's no wonder. You guys know all this. This is one area where children need accurate and morally correct information. The subject of sexuality is discussed so openly in today's world that your children cannot avoid hearing about it, but most of what they hear will teach them the world's abuse of the power of procreation. The home must be the place where they can learn the Lord's plan for the use of this power and gain the strength to withstand the falsehoods taught by the world. So that's essentially what we talked about today. I've talked about all of these things, how it can pull people out of troubled waters of toxic relationships. It can highlight the couple's togetherness, pull them into those waters, bring the couple closer together. It can help them have a broader view of sexuality instead of seeing it so narrowly. A lot of men see it more, they understand that it's reproductive, but they don't that it can be for reproduction. But there's more of a narrow focus on the pleasure aspect for men, and more, at least in our culture, more of a focus on the reproductive aspect for women. And so it can help move men into a more full understanding of sexuality and women into a more full understanding of sexuality. And it can improve their love and kindness towards their bodies. So how can we rewrite our old story as a culture? And what could our new story include? So for any therapists, this is narrative therapy or MFHD people. We have probably an old story in our culture, at least I hear it, that's very sex negative. But how could we rewrite that? If you guys have any ideas, and how can we create, what could be included in our new story as a culture, as a people? Because I think this is huge for us, and this is what's going to cause that big shift, that wave.
This is the thing that I find the most difficult to really find footing with. But I feel like my discussions with my own children are definitely sex positive, and they're ongoing, and I'm doing that aspect. But then I give them over to these other adults who are very sex negative, and I'm very conflicted about it and wondering what you suggest. I mean, like, I heard a story of one woman explaining that a wife should never be fully naked in front of her husband because it gives him bad thoughts. And I'm like, first of all, a wife? And secondly, why is nudity automatically a bad thing, right? And I'm just trying to negotiate in my head, like, how much do I let my kids get exposed to and yet maintain my connection with this community?
I think that's an awesome question. One in which I'm going to let you guys address. How do you do that? Move.
Maybe explain the culture to our children, explain what's going on so that they're seeing it for what it is, and that this is really the way we should look at it. But I think them understanding that that's happening, I think is a good thing for them to know from us that we know what's going on, and people are going to say this stuff, and that's not really the way it is, right?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's a place where you can have that discussion about the positive aspect of it and say something like, it is sad that so-and-so feels this way because we know that this is this beautiful thing. So address it head on, but make sure that you're sending that message. And it's just like, in our culture, we experience a lot of that because the world says all these negative things about lots of things that we do or choose not to do, like drinking. And so I think our children are really resilient, and especially if the parents are a united front. If they are this team and they can be sending these messages, and you can have other people that are also on that team, grandparents that are there, maybe they're watching the kids, they're also sending those messages, and that they'll just have this awareness that, there's some other people that haven't quite figured it out fully, but we know the truth. We know this is something that's going to be really healthy for us, that's going to be helpful and healthy, just like we know that drinking is going to be damaging for us. But yet, we still associate with some people that drink. Uncle so-and-so or Aunt so-and-so drink, and we know that that's not healthy for them. So you're helping them see that there are different perspectives that are out there. But as for us and our family, this is how we see it. And so I think that's a way that it can be addressed. Is there a hand?
I just think, Shannon, when you were talking, I was thinking about how it sounds like you've already created such a safe place for your kids that, some of the messages that they're getting.
Well, I was in the room when I heard that.
Oh, okay. But I think it's really powerful to be able to process that with them, because you really don't have much control over what, wherever you live. They're going to hear messages that your family doesn't agree with, and I think being a safe place, and like you said with your husband too, for them to process that and openly discuss it, I think it's just so cool.
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge because there's a lot of people that won't want to make that shift, that won't want to make that change.
That's really what we've run up against, is because we're like the liberal ones, right, in the neighborhood. And so anytime that we say something like, that's really not a healthy way to present this topic, the pushback is like, well, just negate what they say because they're kind of in this other space.
Yeah, like, don't listen to them.
It's a really tense situation for me because, I mean, literally, I don't trust these people to teach my kids anything to do with sex or just their bodies. And so I don't know, it's very tense.
I think it's a hard change. It's a hard sell because it's been our culture for so long, and that's why I think your kids will probably be the lucky beneficiaries of that new perspective. They'll actually have a fighting chance at it. My guess is in a couple generations it'll be predominantly this way that we're talking about, but it would be cool to have your kids or our kids be ones that are able to benefit from that more early, and to change that within, transgenerationally change that.
I grew up in California, and I was a 1% kind of a person, you're the only Mormon. And, I didn't have a super open dialogue with my parents, but enough to where I felt a little bit confident. And I think growing up in such an environment where you are constantly presented with opposing ideas, you really gain almost like missionary opportunities to teach, and it makes you more confident in what you know. So I think there is certainly a benefit there of being faced with these opposing ideas and learning how to deal with those by yourself, and also having that open conversation to incorporate that.
I love that comment. I think that's an awesome comment. My sister lives in California, and her husband's from California, and he said, I want to. It's like all Californians want to move back to California, and Texans want to move back to Texas, and everyone else is kind of okay going wherever. But he wanted to move. He wanted to move back to California, but partially because he wanted to be out of the LDS culture, the Utah LDS culture. And I don't really get it because I've never lived outside of Utah other than when I was a kid. But he also wanted to have more missionary experiences and opportunities for his kids. And I can see how that's a big strength for them. And so it does provide those opportunities to have conversations that, where you live here, you might not have those, or you might have fewer of those opportunities. So I love that. You're just shifting the perspective of how you view it, instead of, we're going to come face to face with this all the time. That sucks. I wish we could change that. You're saying we're going to come face to face with it, but we're going to make it work for us. My dad teaches martial arts. He teaches Hapkido, and it's not a lot of strong blocks. It's more using their movement, using their energy, and that's essentially what you're doing. You're using that opposition in your favor. So I think that's a great comment. What could you include in the news story? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say one thing that we could rewrite is the negative message that's portrayed about women not enjoying sex. How mom doesn't like to have sex, dad just likes it, mom does it just to check it off the checklist. And a way to rewrite that is we could put a realistic expectation in there, yeah, it can hurt your first time, but it's gonna be good. You're gonna enjoy it, and it's gonna,
Yeah, and I think from a really young age, we have a message that says we can't do that in our culture. So you get the message to both men and women: don't have sex before you're married, and then after you're married, you can have sex, and it's a good thing. But men get a different message: don't have sex before you're married, but sometimes boys will be boys, and they'll be, that just kind of happens. And women get a second message that's very different from that: that if they are sexual, then they're hypersexual, then there's something wrong with them, is ultimately the message that they're receiving. So we've got to fight that all throughout. And women in our culture, I think, need to have that voice that I do enjoy it. It is a pleasurable thing. It's an enjoyable thing. But it sounds a lot more scary for a woman to have to say that than a man to say that, because not only our culture, but the society also, the larger society also says that. So I want you guys to think about how you guys can play your part in creating this wave, in making this change, for the culture and then within your family, how you can rewrite the old story, and how you can create this new story about our culture. Because I think it's going to be this pretty awesome, beautiful thing, because we're a really resilient people, and we're having we know that we're having a lot of sex in our culture because there's a lot of babies that are born. So we're at least having enough to have those kids. We know that we promote marriage, and we know the research says that more people that are married are having more sex than those that are single. Even though the world portrays that single people have more sex, even non-religious single people, that they're having more sex, when it's actually the tables are turned. People that are married are having more sex than those that aren't married. So we potentially, as a people, are having more sex than any other group of people, hypothetically. And so I think that this is going to catch on. I think that we're going to change the way we view it. So here's some resources for you guys. You can come up here and look at it if you can't see it from back there. But there's some, let's see, like the Mormon Channel, Family Conversations. There's some things that are just not written word on there too. So thank you.